Welcome to the next episode of Dr. Kamini Rao's Masterclass. We have another guest and another episode. This guest is extremely interesting, and you may ask me why. Because he's somebody that you would never think of would be on this seat. And why? Because he is a bundle of courage, determination, perseverance, and all that rolled into one. What kind of a job would that be? That would be none other than a job of a police. Now, how can doctors and police get together? I thought we were all on opposite sides. No, that's joking. We are not on the opposite sides because it's only a perception, and I have none other than a person who's been an ACP, TCP, an additional commissioner of police and in the intelligence department and whatnot. But there are a lot more interesting things that I'm going to get from him for you. More important decisions that he has taken which has made a difference. Our perception of the police force is going to be totally different. We have here none other than Mr. Gopal Hosur. Welcome to the show, Mr. Gopal Hosur.
Thank you very, very much.
So, Mr. Gopal Hosur, in fact, when I heard about you, I thought to myself, am I going to get very scared because you were the person who was there in the Karnataka, task force, behind Veerappan, and then I was also told that you almost died in the ambush as well. So I told myself, we doctors are dying every day, with all these mob. At least, here your ambush, we have a mob coming and hitting us for some things that we really never intended to do. But at the same time, the perception of the public, not only the doctors, is that police people are there out to get at our neck, and police are there only to force things down our neck, and it is only to make money. They are corrupt people, and believe me, and whatnot. So I want you, Mr. Hosur, as to what exactly made you get into the police force?
My getting into the police force was a sheer accident.
That's great. Yes.
I studied in a public school whose motto was Ajit hai, Abhit hai. And it trained us to join the defense services of India as commissioned officers. I studied in Sainik School from 1965 to 71. And joining the defense services was my greatest ambition as a young boy in school. I was trained for it. We used to hear a lot of stories of heroism of the defense services, and whenever any defense officer came in front of us in his uniform, we'd always feel a sense of great patriotism in us. But my ambition was short-lived. I did appear for the National Defense Academy, which is the most premier defense institute, maybe even across the world. I passed the written examination, appearing in the banquet hall of Vidhan Sabha here, way back in 1969. I went for the Services Selection Board in Jabalpur. And Services Selection Board is not like any other interview. The interview extends for over 5 days, and you are residential. From morning to evening, you are subjected to various tests. It is the psychology test, a group discussion, an outdoor activity, a team effort, your ability to communicate, various. The army has got the defense has got an extraordinary great way of interviewing people. The defense does not look at extraordinary people. They would want people who are good, and they believe that they can train them to be the best. So I got selected to the Services Selection Board, which is actually a very steep pyramid, because out of 1,000 people who go to the Services Selection Board, hardly about 5% clear it. But the next step was the bigger obstacle, which I thought I would easily clear. That was the medical examination. And since you are a doctor, you know the military medical examination. They take 4 days to medically examine you.
4 days?
4 days. But of course, it is for almost half a day each day. And they put you through various examinations, right from top to the bottom. The knock knees, the flat foot, the eyes, the spleen, the liver, your heart, lungs, joints, everything is put to a test. And only after that they give you a clearance. In my case, unfortunately, in those days, the army doctor with just a stethoscope in his ears detected heart murmur. And I went in appeal against that decision of the army hospital, but the appeal board also upheld it. This happened to me not once, it happened to me thrice. Every time that I went for the examination, I was rejected. So it is as if my life had come to an end, because that was my greatest ambition of life. So I had to come out, study, and family needed that I should get into a job, because it's a question of livelihood. So I did my graduation and went for post-graduation. Meanwhile, I got a job in telephones.
Okay, from defense to telephones, there's a lot of difference, isn't it? How did you feel about it?
No, there was no choice. See, unlike the choices that are available to the youth today, getting a job was paramount those days. Now today the private sector has expanded so much. So many courses are available. But those days, I think, I'm sure, during your time also it would have been so, either join the engineering or the medical, or do the pure graduation course and post-graduation course and become a lecturer or a teacher. So I did my graduation and went for post-graduation. Wanted to get into a bank as a probationary officer or a clerk. I did pass a couple of them, but somehow I was not happy to join them. So I joined the telephones, with the technical department, trained in Bangalore. But while being in telephones, I began to feel very inadequate job. I said, I have been trained to be something more. I should not stick on to this. I must try out and go. So I appeared for the competitive examination. And in the competitive examination, administrative service was my first choice. Police was my second choice. And they drop the merit list and your options, and they choose where you fit. So it was an accident that I got into the police.
Oh, there also it's an accident.
Yes.
So that's good, because sometimes accidents also make your career, and you've done so well in the police department. So it doesn't matter which career you have, if you've got a passion for your work, you will you'll do really well. This is what I feel.
Very true, very true.
So having got through this in this particular way, I think, having been courageous, so a courageous person is not that you don't have fear, it's how you conquer that fear, and you never say die, and you say, I will go ahead and do this, and that's the type of person you are. So you're saying that you take ordinary people and then you regiment them and then make them perform, and that's the defense mantra. And even though you didn't get into the army, you got into the police. And getting into the police itself is not easy, because looking into the police, whether it is the traffic or whether it is law and order or whether it is intelligence, etc. I mean, it's a handful. I would look at it, and you never know when you're being called. So in the line of duty, you never know tomorrow whether you will be alive or not, with all this kind of law and order situation. So having looked at this kind of job, as a DCP, ACP, and getting onto these, posts, I know that because of your meritorious services, you've always had gold medals, from the President's gold medal to Chief Minister's gold medal, many times over as well. And it's not easy to get these gold medals, particularly in the government service. And in spite of that, having a clean record and to be able to get all this, you must have worked hard. To what extent did your family life get affected because of the hard work that you had to do?
Yeah, in fact, I joined the police much before my marriage, and after joining the police, I got married.
And she was okay with you in the police?
Probably as a young girl, she didn't know what she was in for. She was a highly qualified, talented
What was
lady.
she doing?
She was a full-fledged company secretary. She was a gold medalist in MCOM, law, and whatever course that she took. Coming from a small town, Hospet in Ballari district. So I think after we got married, then she began to realize what is it being the wife of a police officer.
How did she take it? Because there was hardly any time.
Yeah, I think probably she had resigned to fate, and like any good Indian lady, she stood by the husband. She accepted the husband's job that he was doing, and probably she also felt happy that the husband is doing well, and that she should give him the freedom to work. It was a mutual understanding, because police job is 24/7, 365 days. You come in, as you rightly said, to do and not to do is the eternal dilemma. If you do, it becomes an excess. If you don't do, it becomes an inaction. Either way, you are criticized. So facing that criticism, for me as a police officer, is one thing, but it also percolates to the family.
And that is actually something that you'll always keep in mind, and sometimes people don't take action thinking that will my family be in danger. And have there been some kind of hair-raising situations like this during your early days where you felt, why did I ever become a police, because this is something that I just didn't want to do, or you felt that doesn't matter, whatever it is, I am in the line of duty, I will have to go through it, and your wife also sort of pushed you forward, and your children also supported you. I mean, how did it happen? Did you inculcate the same thing in the whole family?
Yeah, I think living together, we have always lived together. We have enjoyed one another's company in the limited time that I used to have. Many times I feel guilty that I did not give enough time to my wife and to my children. That apart, I always enjoyed doing the police job. Number one is that I had that Sainik school background in me. And number two, police job is extremely challenging, but at the same time extremely interesting.
Is it rewarding?
It is rewarding, no doubt. The reward is you need to assume it for yourself rather than look at it from outside. A job well done gives me immense satisfaction when I go to sleep. So as I said, the police job is very, very interesting for the simple reason that people pay money to go on adventure trips. They go and watch movies involving heroism. They travel. So they look at some kind of adventure which is external to them. But here is the job which is day in and day out adventurous, interesting. Over and above that, you get paid for it.
But this job, as you say and laugh about it, is not as laughable, because your adrenaline will be pumping, because these kind of brigands and the antisocial elements are not easy to handle, because they come in ambush, or they come in like a guerrilla warfare. You never know, you are not prepared, and if they get the upper hand, it's very sad that even though with all the kind of ammunition you have and the preparedness and the personnel, sometimes your fellow colleagues, your assistants, juniors get killed, and therefore sometimes you feel, is it all worth it? I mean, because of us or because of this they got killed. But on the other side you feel, yes, it is worth it, because at least I'm keeping the law and order. Somebody has to die. We have actually taken this oath when we actually take up the post, that we will fight for our country and for our state, and so therefore you feel and console yourself and say, yeah, this is what I want to do. Has any of these situations where you've had colleagues dying, etc., when you introspected, did you ever feel, and are there any examples like that?
Yeah, there are a couple of examples right through the career where my own colleagues suffered injuries. Many of them suffered death. So those are the moments where you really do a lot of introspection of whether all this is worth doing, or is it better to get out and go to a soft job, push the files, go back home at 5:30, have coffee with the wife. Those are the thoughts. Many times they also come to us. But then when you begin to analyze those thoughts, you always get a feeling that that is for a routine man. It is not for a police officer who wants to do something good. And every job has a challenge. As you are a doctor, I know you must have handled extremely complicated cases where at the end of the day you would have said, this doctor's job is enough. I have done enough of challenges. It has had to add it to my adrenal, my stress, family life, so on and so forth. No? Same thing happens to a policeman. Every time he thinks about this, then again he gets back. Every day you must be, some days you must be thinking of that. Next day morning you are up at 5 a.m. to do a delivery or provide some medical assistance to somebody in need. I think police job is more or less similar.
In a police job, you're exposed to the unexpected. Because you say that okay, there is something wrong there, and there is a mob collected. If you don't get the right intelligence, you feel so sort of naked in front of that particular mob, that should I have got this, should I have got that. And in fact, many of the Hindi movies, or not only Hindi, even Kannada, any medium, they always say that the police comes last. For example, after the entire thing is over, then the hero would have also tackled the brigands and the robbers, etc. But why is this, that they show that the police come in the end? Is there any particular reason, or they want to sort of bring down the image of the police?
This is quite interesting, because I think every movie likes to have a bit of comedy. So there needs to be some comedy in that, and police become the scapegoats in that comedy. But that apart, see, you mentioned about exposure to risks, going late after everything is over. These things do happen, because we classify the jobs, the nature of crimes. Some takes place on the spur of the moment, for which police can do nothing except rush to that spot in the available time and try to contain that. By then enough damage would have happened. There are cases in which there is an organized crime where it is premeditated, a lot of planning, lot of conspiracy takes place. It is in those jobs that the police need to exhibit their skill, because they need to prevent. The main motto of crime is to prevent it and not to solve it later after it occurs. So if we are able to reduce the crime by preventing it, getting timely intelligence, as you rightly said, intelligence is the key to policing. Intelligence is maybe the key to everything in life. So for the police it is all the more important, because it involves physical violence, it involves loss of property. So all the more the intelligence gathering mechanism of the police has got to be very, very good, actionable, because you may have an intelligence which is not accurate, then you are wasting your resources, time, energy in trying to do something about which you don't know much. Whereas if you have a pinpointed intelligence, then the amount of preparation or the resources that you need to use for that will be very limited. For instance, you take a question of law and order. Suppose there is going to be a protest. It is a protest which has been publicized well, you have enough time. So all that you need to do is how many people are going to gather, what type of people are going to gather, would it have a women component in it, what is the route that they are likely to take, what is the time that they are likely to take, at which they are going to do this, who are the leaders, what is the jataka or the background of each of these leaders. Everything needs to be studied by as an intelligence exercise. Once you know the totality of the situation, then you can plan for how to respond to it. Otherwise, you will be deploying thousands of policemen for a mob of 500. That is not worth it. So collection of timely intelligence is the key to good policing. And in my opinion, from my own experience, I can tell you that police job is 95% intelligence, 5% action.
How would you put the media over here? because many a time police would have gone much later than the media. Media will already be with their cameras, etc., and the whole thing becomes a media trial rather than actually the real trial. And media, because of its strong communication skills, they start changing the mindset of the public. And I think if we did not have television, and if we did not have so many kind of medias or electronic media, don't you think, Mr. Hosur, we would not have had so many problems?
Yeah, now the fourth estate, the media, is a very, very important component of our society. Media is a must, media is necessary, media helps to spread information much better, much faster than anybody else. But my problem with the media is glorification of crime. For instance, I will tell you, if listening to a lot of local channels, in the local channels, I have one objection. Why should there be a music to a news? What is the background music going on? The way in which that music is portrayed, it will look like a horror movie. Music is meant for movies, not for news. So I keep telling my people that if at all we want to have some sort of peace in the society, where people are able to think and analyze the situation, only one step government needs to do. That is, cut off music from the news channel. I have mentioned it several times that why should there be, suppose if there is a death, why you want to give a gory music to it? Put some question marks on the investigation done by the media, say everything and then finally put a question mark. Then you are not accountable to it. You said, so I have not said that, but I said probable.
Because the nation wants to know.
Nation wants to know every time. Yes.
No, agreed. But again, looking at it at a different way. Now, for example, I coming from a medical community, all right, we've seen doctors. You see in a mob, when somebody gets killed or something like that, it just gets passed off. But if you look at the private practitioners, I'm talking about, not the government practitioners, the private practitioners are exposed to the vagaries of the public, even though the better kind of services are available in the private sector. So when everything goes well, there is no praise for that private sector, because they say that we are out to get money from everybody, and we are like couch potatoes, so we don't want to go out and sort of argue with anybody. And one death occurs, after all, people die on the roads with accidents and with the plane crash, entire plane crashes because of some faulty engine, but nobody gets blamed for it. But at the same time, with a doctor, one single patient dies, there is a whole big mob over there, and the person's relative who's standing there is not the person who's actually doing this. These are all miscreants who are just coming there and who are making a big noise. And at the end of it, even before the police is called, it's like a guerrilla warfare. The whole entire thing is over. But if you see, the same thing happens in a government hospital. They are protected by layers and layers of resources that we don't get that kind of protection in the private sector. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, I think you are very right. I know of a couple of incidents where hospitals, private hospitals have been attacked, doctors have been attacked.
Yes.
And it is a very, very sad state of affairs. The police and the doctors run similar risks. Whenever something goes wrong, you are blamed. And when we face mobs, people throw stones at us, but actually they intend to throw stones at the decision makers of some decision against which they are fighting, but we become the victims. In the same way, doctors also face the wrath of unruly mobs, but for the police, which is, as I am trying to just compare the responses of the police, death is a very emotional situation, much more emotional than birth. And when somebody dies in a hospital, anybody can attribute wrong treatment. And this word spreads, and suddenly a mob gathers, relatives, friends, and many a times these people become highly charged and emotional. And one small person can instigate the mob into violence, and it just catches up with the mob there. This is a very unfortunate thing. I personally feel the government has taken cognizance of this after a number of cases got reported. So now they have brought in a law to protect the private hospitals, the doctors and so on. So only thing that needs to be done is that an exemplary way of handling such situations. That would mean that if an emotion charged crime takes place in front of a hospital to a doctor, etc., the response mechanism for this should be exemplary. That means, despite the emotional situation of a death, etc., the law enforcement should exercise the law immediately, arrest the people, subject them to trial, and it should end in conviction. Only when there is the fear that a case will end in conviction and people will go to jail, then only they will realize that this kind of behavior is not accepted. So I think it needs to be that the law enforcement machinery should be more robust, more firm, more responsive in such situations. You can't prevent all crimes. You can't prevent all law and order situations. But as and when if it takes place,
a couple of examples.
now, for example, a death in a hospital of a patient, no, it happens suddenly. No doctor intends to kill anybody, no doctor intends to give a wrong treatment, but all deaths cannot be prevented. And it is many a times beyond the scope of the hospital or the capacity of the doctor to save. If doctors could save everybody, nobody would have died. Death is for sure, but when it comes, how it comes suddenly in respect of some people. So it is at that time that small mob of 10, 15, 20, 25 people who come to the hospital, they ransack the hospital, threaten the doctors. So the police response has got to be immediate. All the damages caused to the hospital in terms of this one should be recovered from the people who have caused it.
That will be really good.
That would be a good deterrent.
That's the thing. Now, just moving away from the doctors, looking at this, there's a very interesting thing in your biodata that you did during the time of the 9/11 riots, the thing in Bombay, when Kasab was caught and Kasab was in custody. The fact that they are in custody, obviously the law of the land will have to take its course and the investigations have to go on. And this was a person who was actually caught on camera. He had confessed and he had been in the thing for almost 2 years to 3 years, you know. He was given the best of food and a place to stay, etc. And this was all on government's money. And you had the opportunity of even interrogating him for 3.5 hours. How did you actually interrogate him? What was his mindset? This would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I think that was one of the highlights of my job in those years. As a Joint Commissioner of Police in Bangalore City in charge of crime, most of the cases related to terror, whether it is connected to the Indian Mujahideen, Al-Umma or Jaish-e-Mohammed, any one of these outfits, I would be supervising the investigation. So I developed a special interest to investigate these cases because they are extremely complicated and there is no boundary to them. The perpetrator may come from Pakistan and do the crime here and go back, there somebody else coming from some other states, and it is all done in secrecy because assembling of bombs, timer devices, putting them in public places, a huge amount of damage, people get injured, killed, so on and so forth. So I used to visit all the scenes of terror activity in India, be it Ahmedabad or Jaipur or Mumbai, Hyderabad, Lucknow, Delhi, Chennai, all the places I used to go with my small team to visit them to understand what exactly happened, how it happened and what precautions we can take. No doubt 1 or 2 incidents happened in Bangalore also. So after 26/11 attack in Mumbai, I got a call from my boss saying that there seems to be some incident in Mumbai, can you check it up? So I contacted my counterpart. He was still not aware that it was a terror attack. He said there must be some mafia gang fight like it happens in Mumbai, must be going on. But within half an hour he got back to me. He said, it is far more serious. It is a threat to the national security. He said couple of places have been attacked, hundreds of people have been killed and injured, properties have been damaged, so on, so that. Then I kept closely following it up. Then Kasab was caught by the police when he was trying to escape, and he was formally arrested, produced before the court, taken to police remand. Police remand would mean that he will be in the custody of the police for interrogation. So it was at that point of time I thought, let me take a chance and go and meet Kasab. So I flew down to Mumbai with my colleague, requested the Mumbai police to give me permission to interrogate him, because you need permission. He is in their custody, and as we know, policing is a state subject. So Maharashtra state, Karnataka state, Mumbai police, Bangalore police, we have a lot of protocols amidst us. They gave me, fortunately they gave me a permission, because I had known a lot of officers and we had worked together on various other underworld cases. So 2.5 to 3 hours of interrogation of Kasab was an eye-opener.
Why do you say that?
What Kasab told was a very interesting incident he narrated to me. He said, "Saab, Bangalore में जो अटैक हुआ है टाटा इंस्टीट्यूट के ऊपर, he gave me blow by blow account of that. The way in which he was expressing, it appeared to me that he was also a part of that conspiracy and he was present.
And we had not been able to find out.
We had not been able to find out. So I interrogated him further. I said, how do you know all these details? That was the time he said, साहब, जब अटैक होने के बाद जो आदमी यहाँ आके अटैक किया था वो पाकिस्तान पहुँचा वापस. Abu Hamza was his name. He was the perpetrator of the Indian Institute of Science attack, where he opened fire with AK-56 rifle. Abu Hamza, our professor was killed. Couple of Professor Gupta was Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi was killed. So the way in which he explained it actually surprised me. So I asked him further. He said, in the LET camp, where all these guys are trained, there was a PowerPoint presentation describing vividly why the Indian Institute of Science attack failed. They considered it as a failure because they expected to kill about 50 to 60 people and only one man was killed. So there was a PowerPoint presentation in the terrorist camp, where the ISI guys explained why our man failed. Though he killed one man, but he was able to escape and go back via Nepal to Karachi. So the way in which these terror groups operate is very organized and systematic. It's not that you just decide and you go, no. A lot of planning takes place for years. They survey the whole area. They go through the Google Maps, the approach roads, departure roads, the route in which they should come via Nepal or Myanmar or someplace, how they should infiltrate. They come and take admission in colleges here, studying MBA or something. And they have fake visiting cards. They have the fake identity cards of the college. And they move around. If the policeman catches somebody by surprise at night, he would just say, I'm a student studying in this college. Where do you stay? Room is here. So police will let them go. So this is the way in which terror operates. And so Kasab's interrogation revealed a lot more things about how the terror groups are radicalized, how youth are radicalized, how they are trained, and how they are sent on missions to execute terror activities.